Chapter 9. A Shiver of Sharks. "I guess that's the best we can do to dress up this dump," said Skyla, standing in the living room kitchen on Thanksgiving morning. She surveyed Owen's construction paper turkeys and cornucopias taped in the window. "I'm leaving for Clive's now, but I'll be back at 2 o'clock for dinner. Now, remember what I told you about thanking him, Naomi." I half smiled and nodded to her as she headed out the door. I etched a few more feathers on the bird I had carved. Graham had a gnarled manzanilla branch she decorated for the different holidays, and she thought that if I trimmed it with some of my carvings, it would show them off and make a fitting and conversational Thanksgiving centerpiece. And I wanted to show you guys because manzanita is a little tree. I don't know if you guys can see that very well. This is what it looks like. So they decorate that with different things. So probably for Christmas they put lights on it and stuff. I chose the best of my herd of animals, nestling some of the figures among the twisted curlicues and hanging others from thread on the mangled twigs. "Naomi, what has gotten into you?" said Graham. "I am worried you're going to faint from that irregular breathing. You're not fretting on that figure, are you?" I wasn't worried about my new carving, but the prospect of meeting Clive had me trying to fill my lungs with confidence. Between breaths, I held up the soap and admired it. It was the first time I'd ever carved a bird with the wings in the flying position, and even I could see it was the prettiest and most delicate thing I'd ever done. I set it on the uppermost twig of the manzanita, like an angel on a Christmas tree. "That looks dandy," said Graham. "The new carving reminds me of a bluebird of happiness, the way the wings are out and all. Now, let's get out my yellow checkered tablecloth. I hope it doesn't clash with Mrs. Maloney. Then I'll baste that turkey." I headed for the cupboard to get the tablecloth. Maybe if I looked hard enough, I could find all 8 cloth napkins that matched. I wanted us all to sit down and have dinner like those families in Graham's lady magazines. The ones in the photos passing the food with smiles on their faces and oozing politeness. I didn't want to disappoint Skyla, though lately it was hard making things right for her, let alone the mysterious Clive. I took another deep breath. What if I couldn't say thank you? What if he didn't like me? Clive was big, like a mountain. Not fat exactly, but broad and thick. I looked for tattoos, but he was wearing a leather jacket. Pulled back into a ponytail, his black hair looked dyed, and it was wrinkled into waves of tight lines. The first thing that popped into my mind was that his hair had been French braided and slept in overnight, then let out. He shook hands with Owen and me and gave Graham a poinsettia that dangled a $3.98 grocery store tag. Then he redirected his attention to Skyla, keeping his arm around her waist. He reached up and patted her hair, which wasn't raven brown anymore. A few nights ago, she had bought a box of pumpkin spice hair color at the pharmacy and did a makeover. She had also found a lipstick called Pumpkin Pie that was a dead-on match. Mrs. Maloney arrived, toting her lime gelatin salad with little marshmallows. She wore her pink checkered robe, but in honor of the occasion, she had added a rhinestone turkey pin near the top button. Fabiola and Bernardo came with pots of stuffing, mashed potatoes, and Fabiola's specialty, cranberry sauce with jalapeno peppers. Lulu took one look at Clive and started barking. We all knew she'd settled down, but Clive backed away from her, and the more he backed away, the more Lulu inched forward. Those are my dogs barking, if you guys can hear them. "Get that dog away from me. I don't like dogs. Skyla, you know how I feel about dogs." "Clive has issues with dogs," explained Skyla. Graham walked over, picked up Lulu, and said, "Why, this dog wouldn't bite a biscuit." Bernardo took Lulu from Graham and walked her back to their house. We could hear Lulu whining all the way through the grove. After Bernardo came back and the food was situated, we all sat down on the patio table and Mrs. Maloney's borrowed card table, which we'd pushed together and covered with Graham's tablecloth. Mrs. Maloney said grace and ended with, "And I am thankful for my neighbors, who always take such good care of me, and for this beautiful weather, which allows us to sit outside on Thanksgiving Day while others are freezing in some parts of the country. Amen." "Please eat while the food is hot," said Graham, passing the candied yams. As the food circled the table, Clive picked up the bluebird from the manzanita branch and said, "This soap?" "Naomi carved it herself," said Graham. "It's a hobby of hers. We think she has a natural gift." "Their father was obsessed with carving," said Skyla, patting Clive on the arm. "And not in a good way. Every year he left me for a week right before Christmas to go to some carving thing in Mexico. Imagine leaving a wife and kids at that time of year." "La noche de los rábanos," said Bernardo proudly, "in Oaxaca." "Yeah, the radish night," said Owen. Bernardo had told us about the festival many times. "I don't think I've ever heard of anything like that," said Mrs. Maloney. Bernardo continued, "Those who work with wood come to Oaxaca City from all over the state to carve beautiful scenes out of radishes." "They use not only the little salad radishes," said Fabiola, "but also giant radishes, the size of arms and legs, a special type the government grows for the festival." "For over 100 years families have entered the competition. León, it is a famous carving family in Oaxaca. Naomi has the heart of a carver, like her father." Clive sort of grunted and set the bird down on the table next to his napkin. "All I remember is that those painted wooden animals were everywhere," said Skyla. "He wouldn't even let me buy a store-bought mobile for above Owen's crib. Instead, he took an old branch and nailed it to the ceiling and hung those things from it. I'd forgotten all about that nonsense until now. Do we have to talk about this? Mrs. Maloney, have you always lived here?" As I spooned stuffing onto my plate, I remembered that colorful swirl above my head in the motel room in Mexico. It hadn't been a dream after all. I tucked it away in my mind to think about later. "Yes, I've always lived in Lemon Tree," said Mrs. Maloney. She turned to Clive. "And where are your people from?" He stopped chewing on a turkey leg. "I don't have contact with anyone, and that's by choice, except a daughter from my second marriage. She's a couple years younger than Naomi." Everyone nodded, real polite. Fabiola asked, "What is her name?" "Her name was Elizabeth, but I renamed her Sapphire. Could someone pass the mashed potatoes?" "Isn't Sapphire a beautiful name?" said Skyla. "In all my life, I never heard of such a thing," said Miss Maloney. "Elizabeth is a perfectly fine name. Graham always said that when you're 88 years old, you can say whatever you like." Clive concentrated on pouring gravy over a pile of mashed potatoes. "Her mother named her Elizabeth after her own mother, who I didn't like. I thought she should be called something I could enjoy, especially since she's coming to live with me when I move to Las Vegas after my training." "Isn't that great?" said Skyla. "What about Sapphire's mother?" asked Graham. "She'll get to see Sapphire on vacations and some weekends," said Clive. "I proved that living with me was better for Sapphire. Besides, her mother wasn't responsible with the state money, always spending too much on the kid." "State money?" said Graham. "The state supplements for dependents," said Clive, rubbing his hands together like a fly on a sandwich. "If you have custody of a minor, and you don't make much money, the government helps you out with a little extra every month money. Free legal aid told me everything I needed to know to qualify.
Naomi, Clive and I have decided that you are the perfect friend for Sapphire. Being a little older and all, said Skyla. You could watch out for her like a big sister. You're going to meet her real soon. Won't that be fun? Take a trip to Las Vegas? Skyla was looking around the table with bright eyes and a smile, like she'd just had the most sincerely tremendous idea. Suddenly, I couldn't swallow. Fabiola and Bernardo looked at Skyla with curiosity. Graham stared at her and narrowed her eyes, nodding her head ever so slightly. The only one eating was Clive. Mrs. Maloney set down her fork. We couldn't do without Naomi here for a minute. Anyway, said Owen, she's got school. They've got plenty of schools in Las Vegas, said Clive, so that's not a problem. He took off his leather jacket and tossed it on the patio couch. A tattoo of a shark, teeth bared and dripping blood, bulged on his forearm. An uncomfortable silence, like a thick fog, sneaked its way around the turkey platter, circled the mashed potatoes, and rose up in a cloud above the lime gelatin salad. It was the kind of quiet when you hoped somebody would say any little thing. My fork started to chatter against my plate. Graham reached over to steady my hand. Naomi, help me carry these dishes inside so we can make room for dessert. I made pecan and pumpkin pies. I picked up my plate and followed Graham. Unfortunately, Clive was right behind us, clutching his napkin. Which way to the bathroom? I need to wash up. Graham pointed down the hall. When he was out of sight, she whispered, Don't you pay any mind to that nonsense. Now go get me a few more plates. Graham kept me busy with the dishes, but I couldn't stop thinking about Skyla wanting to take me to Las Vegas. I wasn't going anywhere without Owen and Graham. My idea was that Skyla would move somewhere close by us, maybe to a cute little apartment, and when Owen and I could visit her, stopping in from school on our way home to baby Beluga and Graham. When I came back in with the last of the plates, Clive was sitting in the living room kitchen, leaning back on the bench seat with his hands folded behind his head. Graham rinsed the plates and stacked them on top of each other with a loud clink. This trailer isn't half bad, he said. It's not much, but it's what I can afford, and it's the children's home, said Graham, her voice tight. Well, you must get money from the state, said Clive. That's got to be a bundle for 2 kids, right? And what's the story on that little old lady outside? Is she your dependent too? He was kind of half smirking at Graham. I stopped scraping the plates. Graham did not take to people prying into her personals. Graham slammed a plate down so hard it broke, the pieces clattering into the sink. She turned to face Clive and straightened up as tall as she could muster. Unfortunately, she was not wearing her athletic shoes, and even sitting down, Clive seemed to tower over her. I think you're asking an awful lot of someone you just met, and I don't think it's any of your business. And Mrs. Maloney is a friend, plain and simple. Just then, Skyla walked in. Have y'all been making nice? She asked. Graham never took her eyes from Clive's face. Clive was just inquiring into my finances, seeing how we're such good friends and all. He wants to know how much money I get each month for Naomi and Owen, and I'd like to know why he's so interested in something I've never asked for. Graham shook her head. What you see is what you've got. And for your information, Naomi is not going to Las Vegas to be a babysitter or otherwise. I won't have it. Clive stared at the floor. He seemed mad. Skyla looked at him and raised her eyebrows and pursed her mouth. She grabbed his hand. Clive, this isn't the time or the place. Come on outside and sit down and have dessert. Graham stared after them. Naomi, Would you run and fetch my sweater from my bed? There's a chill outside. As I passed the bathroom, I noticed something wadded up on the edge of the sink. It was Clive's napkin. Next to it, a brown-streaked lump of soap sat in a puddle of water. He had taken my bluebird of happiness from the Thanksgiving table and used it to wash the turkey grease from his hands. After the contentment of the pies had set in, Owen and Bernardo laid out the checkerboard. "Who wants to play?" asked Owen. I glanced at Bernardo and smiled. Owen could beat most adults. "I'll play," said Skyla. They played 3 games in a row, and Skyla won each time. After every game, she whooped and hollered and yelled, "I won! I won!" Owen just sat there, grinning a happy face. "Want to play again?" I had never once seen Owen lose to anyone. I looked at Bernardo, and he shrugged his shoulders. Graham said, "Skyla, why would any grown-up take that much delight in winning over a small child?" "He needs to learn how to compete. He needs to learn how to use his brain. Set him up again, Owen, and let's see you try harder." "He couldn't get any smarter," said Graham. "Oh, I know," said Skyla, patting Owen on the head like he was a dog. I could tell that Skyla didn't believe Graham. "He gets straight A's," I said. "Naomi, that's real sweet of you to stick up for your brother. I'm the same way with people, always trying to make 'em feel better. That's why you and me are 2 peas in a pod." "Did it ever occur to you, Skyla," said Graham, "that he could beat you at any time, and maybe he's just trying to please you?" Skyla smiled. "I won fair and square. Right, Owen?" Owen looked at all of us, who knew better. "Sort of," he said. The sweetness left Skyla's face, and her eyes narrowed. "You mean you've been letting me win?" Owen's gigantic smile slipped into a guilty, sad-eyed face. "I don't like people making fun of me, Owen, so you play like you mean it." Skyla quickly set up the board, and it took Owen a matter of minutes to win. She sat back and glared at Owen. "Just think how smart people would think you were if you didn't have tape plastered all over your chest, and if you wore a lift in your shoes so you'd walk even, like everybody else. Wouldn't that give a better impression?" Owen said, "I had a lift in my shoe once, but the doctors have to make me a taller one because I'm growing. It's coming next month, and then I'll be even. Right, Graham?" His voice trailed off. Before Graham could answer, Clive said, "Hey, let me play, buddy. I love checkers." He signaled for Skyla to go sit on the couch. For a minute, I was grateful to him for getting Owen away from Skyla. Owen set up the board and beat Clive 3 games running. Clive looked up at Skyla. "This kid's an ace. I'd put a ton of money on him and have him play some dudes I know. We could make a fortune." "You'd bet on Owen?" said Graham. "Just for fun," said Clive, shrugging his shoulders. "I get it," said Skyla. "To look at him, you wouldn't think he had a brain in his body or could beat anybody at anything, especially with him being crippled." "Skyla!" said Graham. Bernardo stood up and walked over to Owen. He quickly put the checkers and board back in the box and took Owen's hand, leading him toward his house through the avocado trees. Mrs. Maloney turned to Skyla and said, "Shame on you!" "All I'm saying," said Skyla, "is that he doesn't look smart, and that could work in Clive's favor. You know what I mean. Owen's not right physically, and he has weird habits." "And you needed to point that out to him on Thanksgiving Day in front of all these people," said Graham. "He still has doctor's appointments every 3 months to see what can be done for him. Another one in a week from today. Maybe you should consider coming along to see what this child is up against." Graham looked at Skyla and shook her head in disgust.
Mrs. Maloney, let me walk you home. It's almost 5 o'clock, and I know you'll be wanting to go to bed soon. Fabiola started folding up Mrs. Maloney's chairs. Graham told me, Naomi, run over and get Lulu. I cooked the turkey giblets for her, and it wouldn't be Thanksgiving if she didn't get to eat them. Clive, there's no need to leave on Lulu's account. She's usually a fair judge of folks. Clive grabbed Skyla's hand, and they headed toward the car. Before I reached the grove, Skyla called out, Naomi, aren't you forgetting something? I felt my breath catch in my throat. I turned back and walked towards the Mustang, practicing the line I'd rehearsed. Skyla and Clive were already situated in the car, seat belts buckled, and watching my every move. My throat tightened like it always did when people stared at me. I leaned down and peeked in the passenger window and choked out the words, Thank you for all the nice things you bought us. Clive didn't answer. His chin raised up and down once. I guess that meant, you're welcome. I stood up and, glancing in the back seat, saw a 12-pack of beer on the seat. Was Skyla drinking again? If she was, what would that mean? That she'd have to go back to a halfway house? Or to the hospital? Skyla's eyes turned hard and squinty. That's my business, Naomi, not yours. If you know what's good for you, you'll keep your mouth shut. Wow. The end of that chapter. I don't like her mom. She's not a nice person. I really hope things turn out okay for them. See you next time.